Morning washed the kitchen in a pale winter gold. Marian O'Rourke sat with a cooling cup of tea and a pen she trusted more than most people. On a small lined square she'd written 3 items: eggs, rye bread, bank. The first 2 skimmed across her mind. The last fell straight down. She drew a box around it as if caging a wasp. A hinge creaked. She slid the paper under her saucer. The front door opened 10 minutes early and let in her daughter's voice. "Mom, ready." "It's just to make your paperwork easier." Nina's smile stopped a breath before her eyes. Behind her came Trevor, tall and polite, a leather folio snug under his arm. He nodded toward Marian without quite looking. "It'll be simple," he said. "Sign once and the bank won't bother you." Marian lifted her cup to buy a second. The tea tasted metallic. "Let me get my cardigan." In her bedroom, the air kept the nights chill. She opened the top drawer, slid aside handkerchiefs, and lifted a velvet box the size of a cigarette pack. Inside lay a locket her late husband once joked was heavier than it looked. Now it held a secret, a thumbnail recorder set behind the filigree, bought after too many sleepless hours, and one discreet meeting with a senior clerk. She fastened the chain. On the vanity lay a blank card and a plain envelope. She printed 4 block words, steadying the pen with both hands, and slid the card inside. The envelope went into her purse behind her wallet in the plastic sleeve with her identification. She checked by touch keys, phone, envelope, pen, then returned. Trevor's gaze skimmed the room, counting. He spotted the key hook and lifted the ring with a practiced motion. "I'll drive," he said, the way people announce weather. He held the door and did not step aside. Marian felt the old muscle of courtesy flex and then hold. She would not apologize for moving too slowly. Nina took Marian's elbow in a way that could be tenderness or steering. "We'll be back before noon," she said. Her perfume, orange blossom, and something sharper hung in the doorway after they passed through. Outside, bare trees clattered in a wind off Lake Erie. Marian buttoned her cardigan and followed them to a gray sedan that smelled of lemon wipes over something older. Talk radio murmured about road closures. Trevor turned the volume down and filled the space with potholes, gas prices, and how banks make simple things hard for seniors. "We're taking the weight off you," he said. "You always told us family should help." Houses slid past porches with last year's fairy lights. A snow shovel propped through the snow had gone. Marian had walked this block with grocery bags and library books with her husband's arm and then alone. For a moment she saw Nina at 8, backpack thumping as she ran for the bus, an image that landed warm and sore. At the long light, Nina opened the folio across her knees. The pages were dense with type margins tight. "You just need to initial here," she said lightly, tipping the top page toward Marian. "It lets the bank talk to me. Saves you time." The heading sat in a bold line, durable power of attorney. Marian placed one finger on the folder. "I'll read it at the bank," she said, as if agreeing to taste a soup later. She folded her hands and kept them still, the leather corner pressed into her thigh, and stayed there like a reminder. The city thinned into corner businesses, a shoe repair, a florist boxing tulips, a diner chalking hot soup. The lake made a low, steady breath behind the buildings. Trevor narrated as if talk could soften fact. "How's your sleep been, Mom?" he asked in the tone people use right before deciding for you. Quiet Marian said, which was true the way fog is clear. Nina tapped the leather cover with 2 nails, the corner of a notary stamp peeking through another page. Once that rhythm meant pride on report card days. Now it scuttled down Marian's spine. They turned onto Maple, where the bank sat on the corner like a tidy brick bookend. Pots of winter pansies flanked the door. Glass reflected 3 figures walking toward it, a woman in her late 60s holding her purse like a passport, a daughter whose smile worked too hard, a man whose jaw ticked when he thought no one saw. Trevor parked close. The lot was half empty. A maintenance man salted a thin seam of ice near the curb. A woman in a red coat pushed the door and disappeared inside. He cut the engine and moved quickly, opening Marian's door before she reached for the handle. "Let's get this done," he said, almost kindly. Marian set her feet on the pavement and stood. The locket's chain was a small, steady weight. She adjusted the strap of her purse until it crossed her shoulder just so. The wind pressed her cardigan to her ribs. She thought of the word boxed on a list under a saucer in a quiet kitchen and felt it change from a stone to a key. They walked toward the glass and the cool air beyond it. The door answered their approach with a soft, vacuumed sigh, and cool air lifted the hem of Marian's cardigan as she stepped into the vestibule. Frosted stickers on the glass announced business hours, and a small poster about fraud awareness. A bell chimed thin courteous. Inside, the branch smelled of toner coffee and the citrus polish that lenders prefer because it reads as clean on a nervous morning. Counters ran in a shallow U. A woman at the far station glanced up and then properly looked. Her badge read Priya Desai Teller, the name printed in unassuming blue. She saw Marian first, then the fingers around Marian's elbow, then the leather folio tucked against Trevor's ribs, so tight it might bruise him before the day did. "Good morning," Priya said, warm but not loose. What can we do for you? Routine paperwork, Trevor answered in the tone of someone who had already decided the answer. We were advised to bring it in just signatures. Nina added a quick smile that flashed like a cue card. Now be agreeable. My mom hates fuss, she said. We just want to make things simpler for her. Marian rested her purse on the counter long enough to set her weight, then lifted it again. I'd like to sit, she said, and the please was in her posture, not her mouth. Priya nodded toward the seating area, 2 low chairs, a tiny table with fan magazines about mortgages. As they moved, a man in a navy blazer emerged from a side office and crossed the branch in 3 long strides. He carried himself like the person who knew where the root of a problem lived. His badge read, Elena Park Branch Manager. Welcome, Elena said. Her voice carried business and a small private kindness. Her gaze did not snag on the folio or Nina's hand. It slid over the whole picture and then returned to Marian the way a doctor circles back to a pulse. Why don't we use a private room? We can go line by line without distraction. Trevor brightened as if this confirmed a plan. Perfect, he said. The sooner the better. They followed Elena down a short, carpeted hall to a glass-walled room with a door that closed softly and a white noise machine humming behind a potted plant, its leaves polished into a permanent spring. A small table took the center with 3 chairs on one side and 1 on the other, as if the furniture had opinions. Please, Elena said, indicating the chair closest to the door. Marian took it. Nina slid in tight to Marian's right. Trevor took the corner seat that let him watch both Marian and the hallway. He placed the folio on the table and untied the cords with 2 deft pulls, as though he'd practiced on the drive. He pushed a pen toward Marian. We'll fill the blanks you just signed, he said. It's faster that way. Marian let the pen tap against her knuckle and fall to the table with a small, bright sound. I'll need to see my identification, Elena said, as if she'd interrupted nothing and everything at once. Mrs. O'Rourke, if you're comfortable, I'll just make a quick copy for our records. Of course, Marian said. She opened her purse and slid out her wallet, the plastic sleeve that held her photo ID clouded at the corners by years of being thumbed. Beneath it lay a deposit slip habit, made solid, and a plain envelope, the adhesive unlicked. She layered the ID and deposit slip and without pause added the envelope to the stack so that it appeared to be exactly one more flat, forgettable thing. For the file, Marian murmured, eyes on Elena's, which were steady. Thank you, Elena said, and the thank you covered more than a transaction. She gathered the items, smiled at all 3 of them, and stepped out into the hall. The door closed with a click that was like shutting a box over a secret. The white noise machine did its conscientious work. Trevor took the opportunity to spread the papers in a gentle fan, his hand resting on the top page, not a grip exactly, but a readiness. Nina leaned so close Marian could feel the diffusion of her perfume and the dry heat of a whispered insistence. Mom, Nina said softly, this is nothing. Initial here and they can just talk to me when they need to. It saves you the headache. Marian folded her hands on the table. Her locket carried a mild, constant weight against her collarbone. She found a spot on the wood grain where the varnish had bubbled and fixed her gaze there as if it were a harbor. Out in the branch, Elena passed Priya and set Marian's items beside the copier. Could I have 2 waters to the small conference room, she asked almost casually. Right away, Priya said, already stepping toward the break nook. With her free hand, she tapped 3 keys on the teller keyboard, a sequence so ordinary-looking that even the security camera might have to watch twice to catch it. Across the lobby, the guard, a tall, soft-spoken man named Vaughn, who could fold his hands and still look like a door, glanced up. He did not move quickly. He did not need to. He walked to the outer entrance and with a small silver key turned the latch that allowed customers to leave but not enter until it turned again. Elena slipped the envelope from beneath the deposit slip and drew a thin breath. 4 words stared back in block letters, each carved by hand with the patience of fear. Please help. Under duress. The letters filled the white, like a shout kept barely at whisper volume. She slid the card back into its envelope, copied the ID and the slip, and palmed a second copy of the note into her blazer pocket. She took 2 paper cups and returned down the hall, her pace unhurried and her smile precise. Sorry to keep you waiting, Elena said as she re-entered the room. She set a cup in front of Marian and placed the copies in a neat stack aligning the corners. Let's make sure we have everything clarified. Trevor pushed the pen toward Marian again, a little faster this time. We don't need to make a big production, he said, half a laugh, writing the words. We've got the documents. We've been over them. She just needs to sign. We'll keep it simple, Elena agreed pleasantly. First, though, a brief compliance step. I need to speak to Mrs. O'Rourke privately before we proceed. She let the sentence rest in the air like policy, which it was, and like protection, which it also was. She's hard of hearing sometimes, Trevor said quickly. I can help translate, save you time. I appreciate the offer, Elena said, but this part is one-on-one. We call it Know Your Customer. It's standard. I'll bring you back in shortly. Nina's fingers tightened on Marian's sleeve, gentle enough to be misread, read firm enough not to be. Then the hand withdrew. We'll just wait here, Nina said, aiming for Breezy and landing closer to Brittle. Thank you, Elena said. She opened the door and stepped aside for them to exit. Vaughn had drifted casually within view of the conference room. He looked as ever like someone waiting to be useful. Trevor collected the folio with an audible flick of the cords and led Nina out the white noise machine, abruptly sounding louder without their breathing to layer it. When the door clicked closed again, Elena took the seat across from Marion and leaned forward and elbows off the table, hands open and still. She lowered her voice the smallest degree, not whispering, not conspiratorial, only respectful of a truth that did not need volume to be real. Mrs. O'Rourke, she said, you're safe in this room. I'm going to ask you 3 questions. You can answer yes, no, or with as many words as you wish. Is that all right? Marion nodded. 1, Elena said. Are you under pressure to sign documents you don't want to sign? Yes, Marion said. The word landed without apology. 2. Elena continued, do you understand that these papers would allow your daughter and her husband to manage or control your finances and property? Yes, Marion said again. She lifted the water and took a sip. The cup was cool enough to make a small wet crescent on the table when she set it down. 3. Elena said, not softer, but steadier. Do you feel safe at home when they visit you or when they talk to you about your money? No, Marion said. She did not look at Elena when she said it. She looked at a point just past Elena's shoulder where the reflection of the lobby softened into light. Thank you, Elena said, and the words weren't an end but a hinge. She reached for a form in the folder beside her, a single page with the title, Trusted Contact in a Neutral Typeface that might reassure anyone. I'm going to take a few steps. The first is to place protective holds on your accounts so that nothing can be changed today. I'll also notify our legal team. Because of what you've told me and what I've observed, we are required to reach out to local authorities and adult protective services. Before I do, I'd like to add a person we can contact if something seems off in the future. This does not give them control. It gives us a number to call. Marion's hands trembled once and then settled. My son, she said. Connor. He teaches math in Ohio. He answers the phone when it rings. Do you have his number? Elena asked. Marion opened her purse, drew out a notebook with a split spine and a ribbon that had once been red, and turned to the page where the numbers lived in tidy rows. Elena copied carefully, reading them back twice and writing Connor O'Rourke after the digits, underlining the surname once. She clipped the form to the folder with a small metal bite. Thank you, Elena said again, meaning the act of trusting. She stood. I'll be just a moment. In the lobby, Elena spoke low to Priya, who slid her a phone already live to an internal extension. Elena exchanged swift, precise words with someone, unseen codes and reasons, holds and flags, and returned the receiver with a nod. Vaughn drifted a step closer to the conference room door, the way tides lean toward shore. Elena re-entered with another sheet. I've placed the temporary hold, she said. Nothing can move without an in-person review. She set the form aside with business-like finality. Then she poured the room a quieter kind of stillness. Is there anything you want me to know before I invite them back? Marion looked down at her locket as if recollection could be read there. She spoke without raising her eyes. They say it's to help, she said. They say the bank is confusing and I'm tired. If I hesitate, Trevor laughs like I'm being silly. Nina taps the page where I'm supposed to agree. Same rhythm as when she used to show me A's on a report card. Marion's mouth curved, not smiling. I hear the rhythm before I read the words. Elena did not write that down. Some facts you hold without ink. I understand, she said. A shadow moved beyond the glass. Another customer, no two in neat uniforms, spoke briefly to Vaughn at the lobby door. The exchange was short, professional. Elena did not turn to look. She knew the angles of her branch's reflections the way a pilot knows the shelf of sky. Would you like the door left open when I ask them back in? Elena said. Or closed. Closed, Marion said. The decision steadied something in her chest. Elena nodded. Would you like to keep the water close? Yes, Marion said, and drew the cup nearer. Elena stepped into the hall. Nina and Trevor were waiting by a framed print of tulips that had never met dirt. Trevor's knee bounced twice. He stilled it as soon as Elena faced them. Nina's smile returned to her mouth like a reflex. We're ready for you, Elena said evenly. She held the door and let them pass in. Vaughn moved to a place against the wall where he could see the room without staring into it. Priya at her station adjusted a stack of deposit envelopes by a millimeter, and then another, a small ritual that left everything in order. Nina took her chair with a flutter of coat and composure. Trevor settled back down, the folio already opening under his hands like a familiar trick. The papers fanned out margins and clauses, the faint watermark of officialdom barely visible unless you looked for it. Elena returned to her seat across from Marion and folded her hands so that the pen lay quiet between them. She let the white noise do its small, faithful hum. She let the room recognize that it was full of air and people and decisions. Thank you for your patience, she said, and the words were addressed to everyone but landed closest to the woman with the locket chain bright at her throat. Elena reached toward the center of the table and set a small black device there, the kind that makes accuracy a matter of record. The red light blinked on. The carpet under the table held their chairs exactly where they were. Outside the glass, Vaughn's profile remained a line of quiet resolve. Priya's head bent over a screen that showed numbers and for once meant more than numbers. Elena looked at Marion. Marion met her gaze. The room for a breath balanced itself. Then Elena spoke and the morning kept going. The red light steadied. Elena's hands framed the recorder without touching it. For the record, she said, her voice even will identify everyone present. I'm Elena Park, branch manager. Trevor Lang, Trevor said with the practiced speed of someone who signs first and reads later. Nina Lang, Nina added. Marion O'Rourke, Marion said. Thank you. Elena glanced at the time displayed on the wall clock and noted it aloud. We're reviewing documents Mr. and Mrs. Lang brought to be signed by Mrs. O'Rourke. Mrs. O'Rourke, in your own words, what do these papers do? Marion looked down at the fan of pages, then up. They give my daughter and her husband the power to handle my money and my house, she said. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Trevor gave a small laugh that was meant to sound indulgent. That's not, look, we're not talking about taking anything. It's just so we can talk to the bank and pay things if she forgets. You'll have a chance to explain, Elena said, turning the pen in her fingers once and laying it idle. Mrs. Lang, who prepared these documents. A notary, Nina said too quickly. It's standard. Rick's done dozens. We filled the blanks. Elena drew the top page closer. The notary stamp bled slightly into the paper. The commission number sat askew, its digits, spaced wrong, the expiration date in a format their state stopped using 6 years ago. She didn't frown. She didn't have to. She set the page down and aligned the corners of the stack. Mrs. O'Rourke, Elena continued, do you usually pay your own bills? Yes, Marion said. On the 1st and the 15th. I write the checks myself. Does anyone else have access to your online banking? No. Nina crossed her legs and uncrossed them. She mixes things up, she said softer, trying for reasonable. We're making sure she doesn't get taken advantage of. There have been scams. Let's stay with the documents, Elena said gently. She reached for a form from her folder, the one with the neutral fonts and the soft edges, and slid it aside for later. Mr. Lang. Mrs. Lang. I'd like your acknowledgement on the record that you understand this branch has a process to verify authority before we accept new control over a customer's assets. Sure, Trevor said a syllable too late. Good. Elena tapped her notes once, a tiny metronome no one else heard. Mrs. O'Rourke, earlier you said you felt pressured to sign. The recorder is on. If anything said here makes you uncomfortable, you can tell me to stop. Nina exhaled. Can we not dramatize this, Mom? You always wanted me to handle things when the time came. The time came. We're streamlining, not staging a courtroom. Marion placed her palm flat on the table. Nina, she said, careful with the name, careful with the distance inside it. If you want me to understand, don't tap. Say the words. A thin silence settled. The white noise machine hummed the way summer insects do in late afternoon, so constant you hear it only when you try not to. Out beyond the glass wall, Priya was speaking to a man in a fleece jacket, her hands moving in calm, economical arcs. Vaughn leaned almost comfortably against a column where he could see both the lobby door and the hallway. Elena lifted the top document again. Mr. Lang, could you tell me where you obtained this notary service? From a guy who does closings, Trevor said. Rick, friend of a friend. A last name, Elena asked. Trevor blinked. Why does that matter? For verification, Elena said. She waited. Keating, Trevor said at last. Rick Keating. Elena made a small note. Mrs. Lang, when you presented these to your mother in the car, what did you tell her they were? Nina's smile flickered. That it lets the bank talk to me. That it saves her time. Thank you, Elena said. She turned the page to expose the stamp to the light and angled it so both Trevor and Nina could see. For the record, I'm noting the following. The commission number is misformatted. The expiration date appears inconsistent with state records. The impression is smudged and incomplete. The font used is not the current state seal font. We will submit this to our legal department. Trevor sat forward, heat rising under his collar. Are you accusing us of something? We're her family. I'm describing what I see, Elena said. Accusations aren't my role. She set the questionable papers gently aside and pulled another folder from beneath the table, its metal fastener catching a line of light. Her movements held the deliberateness of someone untying a knot. Mrs. O'Rourke, she said, do you recall meeting with anyone at this bank 3 weeks ago? Marion's thumb brushed the locket's edge. She did not say yes. She did not say no. She looked at Elena and waited. Elena opened the folder. The first page showed the bank's letterhead. The second showed a title in crisp black, Revocable Living Trust Agreement. The date sat below it, a neat island of numbers. The lines that followed named Marion O'Rourke, grantor, and Marion O'Rourke and Connor O'Rourke, co-trustees. The signature blocks were inked and clean. The notary seal on this one sat exactly where it should, its numbers clear, its letters sharp. Nina blinked confusion, scrambling first into her face, then indignation. Trevor's mouth made the beginning shape of a protest and forgot what word it meant to become. "This file lives with our trust department," Elena said, her tone as neutral as the paper. "It reflects that Mrs. O'Rourke retitled her primary residence into the trust. The deed was recorded with the county on the date. Noted here she tapped an instrument number written in the margin, and the bank's internal records reflect the change in account titling. She laid a printed confirmation beside the trust, a small square of bureaucracy, with the county's insignia and a timestamp that did not care about anyone's feelings. "What does that even mean?" Trevor said. He didn't shout, he tried not to. The shout was only in the membranes around the words. "It means," Elena said, "that even if Mrs. O'Rourke were to sign the documents you brought today, they would not alter control over the assets already inside this trust. The trust controls those, not a later power of attorney. The accounts are also under temporary protective hold pending review." Nina gave a short, incredulous laugh. "You're bluffing. You can't just produce a trust to block family." Elena turned another page and slid it across a copy of the grant deed showing the O'Rourke family trust as grantee, with Marion's neat signature and Connor's precise one, each witnessed properly. "This is active," she said simply. "It is binding." For a second, the room redistributed its weight. The pen in Trevor's hand, which had been in motion like a nervous fish, went still. Nina's foot, which had been beating a tight tattoo under the table, stopped. Marion's shoulder dropped the smallest measure, like a held breath released a half-inch at a time. Trevor tried again, picking up an argument as if it were a tool he could use by force of grip. "So what, she hides things now, she's setting traps, it's manipulative." Elena didn't look away. "Mrs. O'Rourke opened a trust product our bank offers. She came in with identification and her own counsel. We completed her requests. That's the record." "Counsel," Nina said. "Who?" Elena turned the trust back toward herself, not because it was secret, but because certain questions did not belong to the people asking them. She made a small notation on her legal pad time page, referenced parties' responses. The recorder's red light reflected once in the window and steadied again. "Mrs. O'Rourke," Elena said, "do you have any questions about the trust documents I've placed in front of you?" Marion lifted the top page as if it were heavier than paper and lighter than everything that had brought her to this table. "No," she said. "I recognize them." Trevor drew a breath, rewrapped it in civility, and tried a different door. "Okay, fine. Then we're talking about what's not in the trust. The checking account, the utilities, day-to-day. She still needs help." "We're not adjudicating duties today," Elena said. "We're documenting facts." "Facts," Nina said. The word came out knife-thin. "The fact is, Mom is tired and we are trying to make it easy, but every time we try, someone in a blazer wants to make it complicated." Elena reached for the recorder and pressed a side button. The little device chimed softly, marking a segment. "For the record," she said, "I'm going to summarize what we've established. Mrs. O'Rourke understands the nature of the documents presented by Mr. and Mrs. Lang and does not wish to sign them. The notary stamp on those documents appears inconsistent with state standards and will be submitted for review. A revocable living trust executed by Mrs. O'Rourke 3 weeks ago holds her residence and certain accounts, and those items are not affected by the papers brought today. Protective holds are currently in place on relevant accounts for a compliance review." Trevor's knee started again under the table, jittering a staccato rhythm into the carpeting. "You're making this hostile," he said, but the sentence lacked the scaffolding to stand. It slumped into the space between his chair and the table's edge. "Mr. Lang," Elena said, "no one here has raised their voice. We're ensuring clarity." Beyond the glass, one of the uniformed men who had spoken with Vaughn earlier stepped closer to the lobby's threshold. He conferred with Priya briefly, her hands still moving in those same economical arcs, then paused where he could be seen without being seen through. Vaughn remained a quiet line near the door, his attention dispersed outward like a lighthouse beam. Nina leaned toward Marion, her tone slipping into a softness that had long worked on teachers and neighbors and cousins. "Mom," she said, "please, we're the ones who bring groceries. Trevor mows when your back hurts. You trust me with everything else. Why not this?" Marion looked at her daughter. The face she had kissed 1,000 times had learned adult disguises, expedience, bright impatience, but the bones underneath were the same as the little girl who once pressed report cards into her hands, tapping for approval. Marion's gaze moved to the faint yellowing bruise on her own forearm, half hidden by a cardigan cuff. The tilted notary stamp sat in the corner of her vision like a crooked picture frame no one could straighten. "I'm listening," Marion said. "I'm not signing." Trevor's hand flattened over the folio. For a moment his jaw worked without sound. Then, with forced care, he slid the papers back into alignment, threading the cords through the holes as if tidiness might reverse direction. Elena let that movement complete. When the last cord lay smooth, she lifted her eyes to the recorder and then to each face at the table in turn. Thank you, she said, and the thank you this time had edges. It marked the end of a part, not the end of the morning. She reached into her folder one more time and withdrew a slim set of pages that bore the bank's crest and a title in a font that said both caution and finality. Notice of Protective Review. She placed it where the folio had been and turned it so Marion could read first, then the others. This document acknowledges that no changes to Mrs. O'Rourke's accounts will be processed today, Elena said on the record and off. It also acknowledges that our legal department will examine the notarized papers you brought. Trevor stared at the notice as if it were written in a language he almost recognized. Nina's throat moved in a swallow she didn't disguise quickly enough. Marion picked up the water. The cup made a small circle of condensation under her fingers. She drank, and when she set it down, her hand stayed still. Outside the glass, the branch kept its slow, ordinary choreography deposit slips aligned, a printer ticking the muted burr of coins in a machine that counted without judgment. Inside the table held 4 people exactly where they were, and the recorder's light burned steady, small as a bead, and exactly as bright as it needed to be. Elena angled the notice of protective review so the header faced the recorder, then capped her pen. The branch felt tuned to a lower frequency, steady, deliberate. Footsteps crossed the lobby. 2 uniformed officers paused outside the glass, and Vaughn opened the door with a small motion that read, like permission, not spectacle. "Good morning," the taller officer said, stepping in and touching the brim of his cap. "Officer Ibarra, this is Officer Sato." His voice carried the patience of someone used to rooms already full of feeling. "We're here in response to a report from the bank." Elena nodded. "We're mid-review. The recorder is on." Ibarra's gaze moved across the table, naming each face as if placing markers on a map. "Mrs. O'Rourke," he said to Marion. "Are you okay to continue?" "Yes," Marion said. Sato set a thin zippered folder on the table and drew out a small form. "We'll need your IDs," she said to Nina and Trevor. "Standard." Trevor slid over his license with a half-smile that didn't last to the edge of his mouth. Nina's hand shook once before she steadied it and offered hers. Sato wrote their names and dates slowly, as if careful handwriting could keep the words from running. "Here's what we have so far," Elena said. She summarized with clean lines the documents presented: Marion's refusal, the notary discrepancies, the existence of a revocable living trust with assets retitled, the protective holds, the note in the envelope. She did not color any of it. She didn't need to. Ibarra listened without blinking into the heat of anyone's story. "Mrs. O'Rourke," he said when Elena finished, "do you want to make a statement?" Marion looked at the plastic water cup. A bead slid and left a faint track on the wood. "Yes," she said, "I do." Sato turned her form to a fresh page. Elena pressed a button. The recorder gave a quiet tone. Marion spoke, and the room recorded exactly what she said, that she had been asked to sign, that she did not want to, that she understood what would happen if she did, that the pressure had not felt like help. Her words were unadorned. They did not try to win anything except accuracy. When Marion stopped, the white noise hum filled the small pause. Ibarra nodded once, as if a ledger line had balanced. "Mr. and Mrs. Lang, he said we're going to ask you to come with us so we can complete our report. You're detained for investigation into possible financial exploitation and document fraud." He did not raise his voice. It didn't need height, it needed weight. Trevor's chair scraped. "This is insane. We brought her here. We're doing this right." "You'll have the chance to say that," Ibarra said. Nina reached for Marion's hand and then stopped halfway, as if a pane of glass had appeared between them. "Mom." She built a smile from leftover pieces. "Tell them we were trying to help." Marion didn't reach for the smile. "Nina," she said plain, and left the rest in the space they shared. Sato gathered the dubious paperwork into a clear sleeve and sealed it with a strip of tape that made a crisp sound like a clean tear on fabric. She slid a card to Elena with a case number written in block print and the time. "We've notified Adult Protective Services," she said, "and the County Fraud Unit. You should have callbacks within the hour. We'll escort them out through the lobby." Vaughn eased the conference room door wider. The light from the lobby widened with it. Trevor's jaw flexed. He stood and gathered the folio as though tidiness could recover authority. Nina adjusted her coat fingers, fumbling the buckle, then found its catch. They passed Vaughn, who looked exactly like a man doing his job without adding his opinion to it, and moved down the short hall out into the steady light of the branch. The room took one long breath. Elena pressed the recorder's button again. The red eye blinked, then steadied. "Mrs. O'Rourke," she said, "would you like me to call your trusted contact, or would you prefer to—" "Please," Marion said. "You call." She handed over Connor's number from the notebook. Elena stepped into the hall and spoke to Priya, who already had a line open to an internal extension and a second handset ready. "I've got him," Priya mouthed, after one ring, then two. She passed the handset to Elena. "This is Elena Park with Great Lakes Trust," Elena said, when the voice on the line identified itself. "I'm with your mother. She is safe." We've completed a protective review. If you can come, yes. We're at the Lakeside branch. She listened, said, drive carefully, and hung up. The moments between hanging up and telling a person that help is on the way are precise as the seconds between lightning and thunder. He's coming, Elena said when she re-entered. He was already in the car. He'll be here shortly. Marian nodded. The nod was small and sufficient. She smoothed the inside edge of her purse where the lining had begun to pill a tender, purposeless gesture that made the bag a place again rather than a container. There were still forms. Sato returned with a victim information sheet. Ibarra asked for the name of Marian's physician, not to prove anything, only so a name existed where someone might call later if they needed to. Elena printed a copy of the protective notice for Marian's records and placed it in a manila envelope, writing the case number on the tab. Priya set a saucer with 2 shortbread cookies just inside the door and retreated like a person taking care not to crowd a moment. When Connor arrived, he came in a beat faster than a walk allows, without breaking into a run. He signed the visitor log with neat, tight letters, wiped his palms on his jeans, as though ink might be wet somewhere, and followed Elena back. Mom, he said, seeing her, not anyone else. He took her hands. Are you all right? Yes, Marian said. The word felt like it had a floor under it. She took in the details that would remain long after the morning had emptied out of itself. Elena's pen capped neatly beside the recorder, the ghost imprint of a notary stamp in the corner of a copy, the way Vaughn's gaze slid away to give privacy without looking like turning his back. Connor thanked everyone without making a speech of it. Elena shook his hand with both of hers, a gesture that moved past protocol into something like acknowledgement. Priya told Marian she would be at the first window if Marian needed anything copied. Vaughn unlocked the latch to the vestibule for a courier and locked it again with a click that reassured without boasting. They left with the manila envelope and the small felted quiet that follows a crisis when the crisis is finished with you for the day. Outside, the wind off the lake had lifted. Flags along Maple Street moved in a slow, organized wave. Connor's car smelled faintly of coffee and winter air. A ferry schedule lay folded on the passenger floor. He drove without narration. Marian watched the town recede in panes of glass, a florist tucking stems into tissue, a barber sweeping a thin river of hair, a boy in a puffed jacket dragging a sled along grass that didn't need it. At the house, the key turned and then didn't, and that was the point. Connor took his tool bag to the front door without asking permission and set the screws in a careful little dish so none would roll. The old lock came out cleanly, the new one seated with a solid, ordinary finality. Each click of the driver landed with a small, satisfying answer. He mounted a simple doorbell camera above the lintel, checking the angle through his phone, and adjusting once so the frame caught the length of the walk and the edge of the street. In the kitchen, Marian filled the kettle and set it on. The burner lit with a soft, familiar whoosh. She took 2 cups from the rack and set them upside down by the stove the way she had done her whole life. On the table, she placed the manila envelope, a pad of paper, and a pen with a fine point. When the kettle sang, she poured and added the tea bags with the careful press of a spoon against string. Connor came in wiping his hands on a rag, and for a moment he looked exactly as he had it, ate dirt at the edges of every finger from rescuing a stuck bike chain. Lock's good, he said. Camera too. He took the cup she slid across the table and breathed in the steam. Marian pulled the pad closer and wrote a name at the top, Nina. She dated the page with the bank's date as if witnesses lived in numbers. She wrote without haste or heat. The sentences walked where they needed to go and stopped when they had arrived. You may not enter this house. You may not manage my money. If you wish to speak with me, you will call first. If you try to pressure me again, I will call the police. Mom. She folded the page. The crease made a clean ridge. She slid it into an envelope and sealed it with the edge of a dampened paper towel, pressing once along the flap until it held. They drank in the quiet, made by 2 people who know how to share a room without filling it. Outside, the small maple by the walk trembled a little in the wind. Last year's hollyberries clung at the fence, stubborn bright dots against the pale. Somewhere a dog barked twice and then decided against a third time. Connor rinsed his cup and set it in the rack. I'll stay tonight, he said, but it was not a plan so much as a fact already unfolding. He went to the living room to make a call and returned with the soft sound of someone who had said what was necessary and nothing extra. Marian stood by the sink and looked at the window the way people look at pictures when they aren't sure whether to move on to the next one. The glass showed a little of her face and a lot of the yard. The locket lay cool against her collarbone. She unclasped it and set it on the counter. It made the smallest clink and came to rest like a coin that has finished deciding which side to show. She wiped the damp ring where the cup had stood. She put the pen back in its dish. She opened the manila envelope, took out the protective notice, and slid it into the drawer, where she kept warranties and appliance manuals and a handful of photographs that had never found frames. The drawer shut with an honest wooden sound. Later, she walked room by room the way she did on nights when the furnace clicked on for the first time each fall, not checking for danger so much as reacquainting herself with the arc of the hallway light, the clean, worn patch on the stair rail, the tiny catch in the bathroom door that required a second, gentler push. Each thing answered her attention by being exactly itself. When she returned to the kitchen, the list she'd tucked under the saucer that morning waited where she had left it. She slid it free, eggs, rye bread, bank. The last word no longer pulled. She drew a slow line through it and wrote stamps beneath, then added tulips for the strip of soil by the porch that gets the first blush of spring. She set the list by the door next to the keys that belonged to her and no one else. Evening came down cleanly like a shade rolling. Connor brought in the last of the tools and flicked off the porch light with the confidence of someone who knew which switch did what. Marian turned the cups upside down to dry on the towel. The house took their movements and made them part of its own footsteps absorbed into floorboards that had learned the weight of this family long ago. Before bed, she set the locket in the small dish on her dresser beside a rubber band, a safety pin, and a ticket stub from a movie she and Connor had once gone to on a rainy Tuesday. She did not think about why she kept the stub. Some things you keep because they are a measure of time as honest as a ring of condensation, as brief as a red light on a table glowing to say, now, not later. She turned off the lamp. The house settled the way houses do, small sighs of wood and duct in wind. The new lock clicked, holding. The camera's tiny diode made a point of light no one would notice unless they were looking for it. Marian lay down and let the mattress take her weight. The day had made its marks. The day had also left its room. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.